When Fear initiated the contract, he advised, "Don't die, Simon Valentia." Midway through the commencement of the contract, Simon interjected, "Wait a moment, Fear. What do you mean, don't die?" Suddenly, Simon began to feel dizzy and eventually drifted into sleep, to which Fear simply exclaimed, "Oops." Fear then shifted his attention to Simon's skeleton, inquiring if the master was deceased. The rat skeleton shook its head, indicating it didn't possess that knowledge. Several hours later, Simon regained consciousness, and Fear greeted him with a casual, "Oh, you're awake." Simon proceeded to question what had transpired with the contract, and Fear confirmed that the contract was successfully established. He also remarked that Simon should be feeling the changes within himself. In response, Simon acknowledged the transformation, expressing that his core felt enlarged and more stable. He elaborated that previously, even a brief encounter with darkness would overwhelm his body, but now he felt as comfortable as if he were immersed in warm water. Fear extended his congratulations to Simon for becoming one of the 7 battalion commanders, to which Simon expressed his gratitude. However, at that moment, Simon experienced a wave of weakness, and Fear advised him not to overexert himself, emphasizing that his body had just undergone a significant transformation. Inwardly, Simon noted that he had a pounding headache and decided that it would be best to rest overnight to allow his body to adjust. Fear concurred, assuring Simon that the sensation would trouble him for a while. Simon approaches Fear that he has a question and Fear replies, "Ask away, boy." Inquiring about the battalion, Simon asks, "What is the battalion?" Fear's reaction was intense. He became visibly agitated and shouted at Simon, "You made a contract with me without knowing what the battalion is." Simon calmly replied that he had already informed Fear that he didn't know. Fear, clearly exasperated, placed his hand on his forehead and remarked, "Unbelievable. It might take me a while to understand the kind of human you are." Realizing that Simon needed an explanation, Fear decided to provide one. But before he began, he asked Simon how much he knew about the undead. Simon admitted that he knew as much as a first-year Kizen student would, without any prior preparation. Fear acknowledged this and said, "A new student daring to come here does sound like Richard's son." Fear then proceeded to explain the 3 categories of undead in this world. First, the undead in this world can be categorized into 3 groups: summoned undead, natural undead, and the battalion. First were the summoned undead, which were artificially created by necromancers using black magic and followed the summoner's commands. Next was the natural undead, which came into existence without the involvement of necromancers or black magic. These undead were the ones people typically thought of when they considered the undead. Due to their blind hatred for the living and extreme aggression, natural undead were considered monsters by humans. Finally, Fear introduced the battalion. He described them as a category that existed between summoned and natural undead. The battalion could function independently with their own cores, but they also obeyed the orders of necromancers and higher-ranking undead. There were only 7 battalions in the world, and by extension, only 7 necromancers who could control them. Fear revealed that he was one of those 7 now, making Simon one of the chosen necromancers with the ability to control a battalion. Fear continued to explain that typically, a summoning necromancer could lead an undead platoon. As their summoning skills improved, the size of their undead armies increased, but it was rare for them to control forces larger than a squadron. Intrigued, Simon asked about the high-level necromancers who had graduated from Kizen, wondering if they could command larger undead armies. Fear confirmed that these high-level necromancers could indeed control an army of undead the size of a corps, but he often found them to be inefficient. Curious about the reasons for this inefficiency, Simon inquired further. Fear explained that all undead led by a necromancer were considered summoned undead, and their movements were influenced by the darkness of the summoner. Both summoning and controlling undead consumed the summoner's darkness and mental strength, so it became burdensome when the size of the army grew significantly. Simon suddenly remembered the incident with one of his skeletons getting destroyed on his way to the ruins and how it had caused him a headache. Fear confirmed that it was due to a similar reason. When the summoned undead suffered damage, it burdened the summoner. However, the battalion's undead operated through their own independent magic powers, which meant there were no limitations on their size. Fear asks if he ever heard about a story of a necromancer leading a gigantic army of the undead. Simon confirmed that he heard about that, and Fear explains, that will have been the one about a battalion commander. He asked if Fear was telling him that, as one of the 7 chosen necromancers, his summoning quantity was limitless. Fear affirmed Simon's understanding, stating that he was indeed one of the 7 necromancers whose summoning quantity was limitless. Fear says, well, does that answer all your questions? Simon says yes, and he thanks Fear for the explanation. Fear proposed that now that their contract was successfully established, it was time to discuss their plans moving forward. Simon agreed, and Fear initiated the conversation by addressing their unique circumstances. He asked Simon if he had any intention of leaving Kizen, to which Simon replied that he had no such plans. He mentioned that his father wouldn't approve of such a decision, and he still had much to learn at Kizen. Simon then inquired about Fear's special circumstances. Fear clarified that the uniqueness of their situation stemmed from the fact that his battalion was in a particular predicament. Simon asked if this predicament had to do with the dissolution of Fear's battalion, which Fear confirmed. However, he emphasized that there was more to their situation. Curious, Simon pressed Fear to explain further, and Fear revealed that his battalion was currently regarded as the public enemy of the Necromancers. They were wanted because of the crime committed by the former commander, Simon's father, Richard. Simon recalled his father's inability to enter the territory of the Dresden Kingdom when he accompanied him to Kizen and suggested that it might be connected to this crime. Fear agreed and explained that the crime in question was treachery. Richard had fallen in love with a priest, and during the ongoing 100 Years' War between Necromancers and Priests, he had ordered his battalion to protect her by attacking fellow Necromancers who sought to harm her. Many Necromancers were killed by Fear's battalion, leading to the order for their extermination, which remained in effect even after their dissolution. Simon then asked Fear if he resented his father. Fear clarified that the battalion did not experience emotions like resentment. However, he added that he would be quite displeased if Simon were to follow in his father's footsteps. Simon chuckled, and Fear reassured him that there was no need for guilt because it was Richard's will. Fear expressed strong disapproval of Richard, calling him a monumental jerk. Simon questioned this characterization, and Fear elaborated, explaining that Richard was a scoundrel who would make girls cry daily, infuriate his professors, and skip class. Fear was taken aback for a moment and then realized that Simon was Richard's son. Simon confirmed this, revealing that his mother's name was Anna Falentia, which left Fear shocked to learn that Simon's mother was the priest. Fear was utterly shocked by the revelation that Simon was the son of his friend and nemesis. He expressed his disbelief and dismay, finding it difficult to fathom how this situation had come to pass. Simon decided to tease Fear by imitating his mother, Anna, saying, "Darling, dinner is ready." This deeply disturbed Fear, who urged Simon to stop, fearing nightmares. Fear pleaded with Simon to cease his imitation, exclaiming that he would have nightmares and calling him a devil. While Simon continued to laugh, Fear trembled at the thought of Anna. Simon imitated his mother once more, saying, "I was looking forward to working with Fear," to which Fear angrily responded, "Don't smile like that, woman, you damned boy." After some time, Fear managed to regain his composure and said, "Fine, you can't change who you are, I suppose. Let's go back to what we've been discussing." Simon agreed, and Fear advised him to focus on acquiring knowledge from Kizen and getting stronger while keeping his ownership of the battalion a secret. When Simon inquired about the reason for the secrecy, Fear explained that Simon was not a complete stranger but the son of Richard, which would raise eyebrows among the elders. Furthermore, the news of a Kizen freshman owning a battalion would surely stir reactions among other necromancers, possibly leading to confrontations with those stronger than Simon. Simon realized that more powerful necromancers might come after him and stated his need to become stronger. Fear approved of his response and emphasized the importance of learning everything he could at Kizen, believing that this would help the battalion recover its former glory. Simon acknowledged his understanding, and Fear continued, suggesting a way to operate the battalion under their special circumstances. Simon was curious and asked what it was. Fear focused his attention on Simon's rat skeleton and demonstrated that he could control it. Simon was surprised and asked if Fear could control all of his skeletons. Fear explained that they now shared the same darkness, so all undead summoned with Simon's darkness belonged to the battalion. Simon held the first command as the battalion commander, with Fear as the second authority. However, these undead had not yet been fully incorporated into the battalion. Simon inquired about the process of incorporating undead into the battalion, seeking a better understanding of the concept. Fear decided to demonstrate it and proceeded to incorporate Simon's rat skeleton. Fear grabbed the skeleton and infused it with a burst of darkness, causing the darkness to envelop the rat skeleton. Once the process was complete, the skeleton fell to the ground. Fear explained that this incorporation essentially turned a summoned undead into a natural one, giving it a core. Simon observed the rat skeleton and realized that it now possessed a core. Simon expressed his concern that the incorporated skeleton might be easily noticeable at school, but Fear reassured him, stating that it was unnecessary to incorporate all of his undead. He mentioned that summoned undead were more efficient in battle, so Simon could leave the incorporated undead behind while using summoned undead at school. If any of Simon's undead reached the end of their duration or sustained significant damage, he could bring them to Fear, who would then incorporate them into the battalion. Simon was pleased with this arrangement and commented that it would work well. Fear and Simon exchanged a fist bump, and Fear encouraged Simon to become stronger, noting that summoning excellent specimens of the undead would increase the battalion's power. Simon agreed, and then he mentioned that the skeleton seemed to behave more like an animal. Fear explained that it shared some characteristics with natural undead but emphasized that Simon had the authority to control it. He advised Simon to summon the skeleton right away if needed. As their conversation continued, Simon mentioned that he had only been at Kizen for 3 days, indicating that he was still relatively new to the school. Fear noted that it should be soon for Simon to receive tasks at Kizen since first-grade students could undertake assignments within a few days. He mentioned the teleportation system that allowed students to travel to Roke Island and across the continent. Fear proposed that when the time came, he would accompany Simon, providing him with the opportunity to operate the battalion and gather the scattered forces across the continent. Simon expressed his admiration for Fear's knowledge of Kizen, to which Fear explained that he had closely observed Simon's father throughout his life at Kizen. Fear had also witnessed how Richard operated the battalion. Simon eagerly requested to hear more about it, blushing slightly. Simon asked a question about the behavior of undead under a summoner's control. Fear explained that undead acted out because the summoner often lacked an understanding of them. He clarified that undead were driven by the strong netherbelief, which could be likened to a firm will or a strong desire. For instance, if someone had a deep hatred for another person and constantly wished harm upon them, the undead under their control would remember that will and act upon it, even when the summoner was not present. Simon was taken aback by this revelation. Fear assured him that he would provide further guidance and help Simon understand matters from the undead's perspective. Simon thanked Fear for the information, stating that it was genuinely helpful. Fear continued by offering to teach Simon how to give an attack order to the undead. He stressed the importance of strengthening one's will regardless of the target. Simon questioned the concept of will, and Fear gave him a practical example, encouraging Simon to direct his hatred toward an imaginary enemy, in this case, the wall behind him. Simon agreed to try it, saying he would focus his hatred on the wall. Fear urged Simon to take revenge on the wall, imagining it as the killer of his lover, and encouraged him to destroy and tear it down, soaked in the wall's blood. As Simon focused on the wall with strong negative emotions, the skeleton he had commanded began to attack it. While the skeleton continued its assault on the wall, Fear explained that he had used strong language to help Simon understand, but the most crucial part was Simon's will. A top-class necromancer should be able to convey their true will even when giving orders for small tasks. Negative emotions like rage, hatred, and the desire to kill were more powerful in such situations. Fear tells Simon to try ordering the skeleton to stop. Simon attempted to stop the skeleton's attacks by ordering it, but the skeleton did not obey his commands, ignoring them several times. Growing frustrated, Simon raised his voice and threatened the skeleton, warning it not to disobey his orders again. Fear observed Simon's actions closely and noted that Simon had used the absolute order already. He was impressed by Simon's display of authority and realized that Simon was no ordinary, backcountry boy. Fear questioned what kind of monster Richard had raised. Simon expressed his frustration to Fear, feeling like he couldn't control his undead properly. The skeleton, which had been attacking the wall earlier, stopped moving and simply stood there. Fear reassured Simon, telling him that he had done well. However, he emphasized the importance of training to be able to control the undead with a single order, especially since time could be crucial in the field. Simon faltered and Fear supported him. Fear says that it's because he was feeling stressed and shocked by the recent events. He sat down on the ground and suggested returning to Kizen after taking a short break, as he only had permission to stay outside for a day. Fear agreed and threw a badge to Simon, explaining that it would be a way for them to stay in touch once Simon returned to Kizen. The badge would allow him to contact Fear anytime he needed help or advice. Simon thanked Fear and promised to return the following weekend. Fear encouraged Simon to look forward to his new achievements in a week. The scene then shifted to Kizen, where Simon was taking an exam. Fear, in the form of a badge attached to Simon's clothing, greeted him and expressed excitement about being back at Kizen during the student protection period. He also mentioned the challenging exam that Simon was facing, causing Simon to appear somewhat troubled. The scene shifted to their dorm the night before the exam. Kizen was sleeping, and Simon and Dick were having a conversation. Dick, wearing his glasses, started a briefing. Simon was attentive and ready to listen. Dick began by explaining that their morning and afternoon classes next Monday were both in elementary black magic, and they would have a group assignment for that subject. Once the groups were determined, they would stay the same until the end of the semester, making it a matter of their survival at Kizen. Dick emphasized that a group consisted of 4 people and that it was essential for them to be good at different subjects. Simon agreed and understood the importance of a balanced group. Dick continued to explain the details, mentioning that they learned a total of 9 subjects, including catarology, summonology, spiritology, toxicology, hematology, magical combat, and defense against the holiness, along with elementary black magic. Among these subjects, catarology, darkness dynamics, and summonology had the highest percentage in the final grade and were known as the 3 studies of necromancers. Simon realized that between him and Dick, they covered 2 of the 3 important subjects. Dick had darkness dynamics, and Simon was focused on summonology. Dick mentioned that they needed to find someone who was good at catarology, and for the remaining person, they needed someone who was skilled in spiritology, hematology, toxicology, or magical combat. Dick explained that students who excelled in magical combat usually had poor grades in other subjects, so they were excluded. Similarly, those who aimed to major in catarology were often good at defense against the holiness. Hematology and toxicology had a lot of similarities, so students often studied both. Simon seemed overwhelmed by all this information and asked if they had to know all of this. Dick confirmed that they needed to be aware of these details, and it was crucial for their group's success. The scene shifted to the exam room, and Simon was struggling during the test. Beside him, Dick seemed surprised and questioned why Jane Olivia, the vice-chancellor of Kizen, was in the first-year classroom. He explained that she was a strict figure who could expel even a third-grade student. Simon asked who Jane Olivia was, and Dick informed him about her position. Jane Olivia then called out to Dick Hayward, who flinched in response. Jane says life is full of unexpected situations, Mr. Hayward. If you keep on chatting, I'll regard it as cheating and void your exam score. She warned the students not to chat during the exam, and the students looked scared. Jane Olivia addressed the students, acknowledging their confusion about her presence. She explained that she had been teaching only the third-grade classes so far, which might lead some students to believe that her appearance in the first-year classroom was temporary. However, she said that she was officially in charge of Class 1A for the semester, even though she had been teaching only third-grade classes. She encouraged the students to try hard and not disappoint her with a significant gap in their skills. After her announcement, the students replied with an "okay." Simon realized that he didn't know a single question on the exam and understood that adapting to Kizen wouldn't be easy. Despite the challenges, he was determined to give his best effort. The exam eventually ended, and Jane Olivia wished the students well and informed them of their next class after lunch. After lunch, the students returned to their classroom, and Jane Olivia announced the start of the grading. The students responded affirmatively. While the students were checking the papers, Nephthys seemed to be fooling around. Jane asked Nephthys why she was there, to which Nephthys replied that she was there to hang out. However, Jane's face remained serious. Suddenly, Jane used her hand to chop Nephthys's head and told her not to be a distraction. Jane then instructed the rest of the students to finish grading in an empty lecture room, to which they immediately agreed. Nephthys was upset and mentioned that Jane had been a pure and cute girl when she had picked her up in the slums. Jane replied that she had changed due to overworking and stress, and she suggested that Nephthys could help with grading since she was there. As Jane was flipping through the test papers, she noticed that one student had answered most of the basic questions wrong but had attempted to solve the hardest question. During the test grading, Nephthys asked Jane why all the names were covered on the test papers. Jane explained that it was a blind evaluation to prevent biases in her grading. Nephthys commented that it seemed intense for the first test of the semester and called Jane scary. Jane mentioned that there were interesting discoveries in the test papers. She pointed out one test paper that Nephthys had doodled on. This student had answered a challenging question on toxicology correctly but had gotten a comparison question wrong. Nephthys said that's why she wanted to see the names, but Jane covered it. Nephthys called this student a dum-dum. Jane then shifted her attention to another test paper, which was the complete opposite. This student had answered most of the basic questions incorrectly but had attempted the hardest problem. Their formulas for various subjects, such as darkness dynamics, summonology, and catarology, were all incorrect. It appeared that this student hadn't gone through any preparation lessons and had deduced answers based on last week's classes. Nephthys noticed that the student used a summonology formula for a question related to calculating the amount of darkness and asked for the correct answer. Jane explained that using the Terran theorem, the answer was precisely 1,200,000, but the student had written 1,200,146, which was very close to the correct answer. Finally, Jane gave Simon's test paper to Nephthys and asked why she had been assigned to a first-grader classroom, specifically Class A, where Simon Fulensha was. Nephthys smiled but didn't provide a direct answer. Jane thought to herself that she had always known Nephthys was cunning 300-year-old fox. After the exam grading, the students gathered around the bulletin board to check their scores. They were discussing their grades, and someone mentioned that the hematology subject had significantly lowered her average score. The students were still in a frenzy and crowded around to see their grades. Simon finally saw his grade. Catarology 40, Darkness Dynamics 33, Summonology 76, Spiritology 25, Hematology 20, Toxicology 20, Magical Combat 43, Defense Against the Holiness 40. And Simon commented that he thought he was prepared to see the result, but seeing the actual numbers was a real blow. Dick slapped Simon on the back and mentioned that his summonology score was impressive for not taking any prep courses before. Simon replies, "Really? How about you? Did everything come out all right?" Dick shared his scores, revealing that he had scored in the 70s for most subjects, maintaining an average of around 70. Simon expressed feeling betrayed that Dick was also good at schoolwork. Dick reassured him that he had only studied enough not to get expelled. However, he brought up a concern about their plan. All the students' scores were released in the first class of the day, making it difficult to recruit group members now that everyone had a clear measure of everyone's abilities. Just as they were discussing their predicament, Jane arrived and announced that they had 30 minutes to check their scores and form groups of 4. These groups would remain the same throughout the semester, and they would have group assignments that required collaboration among the members. Jane emphasized the importance of teamwork and warned that grades would be deducted if students failed to show good teamwork. Simon and Dick needed to pick their teammates carefully. The classroom was in chaos as students panicked and shouted, trying to find members for their group. Some were highlighting their strengths in different subjects, hoping to attract potential teammates. Simon, realizing the importance of selecting the right group members, looked at his list and recalled that Dick had planned to speak with Jamie, their number 1 choice, while Claudia was number 2. However, when he looked at Jamie, she had already been invited to another group. Remaining calm and collected, Simon decided to approach Rosenthal, the 3rd choice on their list, as there were no groups of 4 formed yet. However, Rosenthal had teamed up with Catherine, the 4th on their list. Simon assessed the situation, understanding that the students at the top of the class were still observing the selection process. He realized that catarology was the subject they needed most and had to make a wise choice. He then approached Malin Villain and asked her to join their group. Simon's audacious decision to invite Malin Villain to his group left the students in the classroom surprised and even bewildered. Malin, with an average score exceeding 90, questioned his choice, stating that special admission was no free pass and that she only trusted what she could see for herself. She couldn't fathom why Simon, with an average score of 30, would ask her to be in the same group. Simon, however, had a clear rationale. He noticed that Malin's scores were slightly lacking in summonology, with her only 80 score, and he saw potential in improving this area. The other students couldn't believe that a 30-pointer was taking such a bold stance against a 90-pointer. The murmurs in the classroom reflected their surprise. He proposed a bold promise. He would work diligently for a month to surpass her in summonology. If he couldn't meet this goal, he would quit Kizen. In response to Simon's proposal, Malin, initially taken aback, accused him of being crazy and urged him to take back his words to avoid embarrassment. Simon remained steadfast in his commitment, refusing to retract his promise. Malin's inner thoughts reveal her determination to maintain her position at the top of Class A throughout the semester, with her main rival being Hector. She acknowledges that while she can outperform Hector in written exams, she struggles in combat and performance assessments. To overcome this obstacle, she realizes she needs to excel in the group lectures, and that means making up for her shortcomings in summonology. When Simon made his promise to work diligently for a month and surpass her in summonology, Malin contemplated the potential benefits of this arrangement. She saw an opportunity to leverage Simon's unique skills and decided to take a calculated risk. Malin posed a question, asking if Simon was sure he could keep his promise, and Simon confidently affirmed his commitment. Malin agreed to join Simon's group, and they shook hands to seal the deal. At this point, Dick, who had been observing this exchange, couldn't contain his excitement and hugged Simon. Malin, still adjusting to the sudden turn of events, inquired about Dick's identity. Simon says he's our group's member. I just told you that it was our group. Simon means that there's already a member aside from him. Malin expressed her dismay and said, "My God." She warns Simon that she will never forgive him if he gets in her way, and particularly addressing Dick as a free rider. Dick replies that it was so mean. Simon took Malin's comments in good spirits, laughing off the free rider label. With Malin now part of their group, the chapter was concluded. Malin and Simon found themselves in conversation. Malin, after confirming that the catarology and summonology subjects were already covered in their group, inquired about Dick's score in darkness dynamics. Dick revealed that he had an average score of 70 and had scored 74 points in darkness dynamics. Malin, although somewhat picky, admitted that his score wasn't bad. Dick asks Malin about who they should pick as a fourth member. Despite Malin's initial reluctance, she eventually expressed a preference for a group member who could handle hematology, a subject known for being time-consuming and involving a lot of calculations. Dick says to Malin and Simon to sit back and relax while he was looking for their potential fourth member. He says that he will be back soon. While they awaited Dick's return, other students in the classroom began to take notice of Malin and Simon being in the same group. Some students were impressed, suggesting that having both the special admission student and the top student in one group was like a game over for the others. However, others remained cautious, emphasizing that Simon's previous academic performance didn't stand out. Malin initiated a conversation with Simon, inquiring about his background and family. Simon shared that he was the heir of a baronship in Baldwin Kingdom, with his family managing Leschel. He returned the question, asking about Malin's family. Although visibly irritated, Malin answered that she came from a highly distinguished family with deep roots in the Ivory Tower, the Magic Tower. When Simon mentioned the Ivory Tower and associated it with CERN, the special admission number 2, Malin became cold while wearing a smiling facade. She politely asked Simon to stop there, indicating that the topic was sensitive. Simon, realizing he might have unintentionally touched a nerve, apologized, and they decided to avoid further discussion about their noble families. With Dick's return, the final member of their group was introduced. A subject known for being time-consuming and involving many calculations, the girl's impressive score of 87 in hematology. She introduced herself as Camiberez Ursula but mentioned that they could call her Cami for short. Cami expressed her gratitude for being allowed to join their group and pledged to do her best to contribute to its success. Simon reassured Cami that there was no need to be so formal, emphasizing that they were all in the same grade, but Cami said she was only 16 years old. Dick humorously pointed out that age didn't matter within their group, mentioning that there was a 20-year-old member among them. Malin, upon hearing Cami's last name, Ursula, seemed to recognize it. She asked if Cami was from the great vampire family Ursula. Dick also chimed in, expressing surprise that they hadn't heard about her if she came from such a prominent family. However, Cami clarified that her mother was an ordinary human, which appeared to explain why there was a lack of public awareness about her. Simon thought that she was an illegitimate daughter of the vampire family. It's not surprising for people to not talk about her if she has a troubling family history, similar to Simon's situation. Dick shared his background and aspirations, revealing that he came from the White Cow Merchant Group, one of the largest in the region. Cami was genuinely surprised. She couldn't believe that Dick was part of such a prominent family. Dick went on to explain that he was the third son in a family of 8 siblings and that he was sent to Kizen to study black magic due to his slight talent in the field. However, He had his own dreams and ambitions, intending to graduate from Kizen and establish a successful merchant group in Rockist, separate from his family's business. Simon acknowledged Dick's determination and told him that his goals were commendable. Malin, on the other hand, appeared rather indifferent to Dick's story, while Cammy encouraged him and wished him luck. Their conversation was interrupted by a teaching assistant who assigned them to group number 7 and asked them to write down the names of their group members and the subjects they intended to focus on. The Ta also mentioned that they needed to choose a group name and a leader. When handed the paper to fill out their group information, Malin snatched it from Simon's hand, indicating that she was the group leader. Since she was the key member, Simon asked if she wanted to be the leader, to which Malin confidently accepted. With Malin as the leader, the group now needed to decide on a name. Malin turned to the others, asking for suggestions on what their group name should be. Malin confidently chose Team 7 as their group name, and while Dick suggested Malin does it all, Cammy favored Pink Rabbit Girls. Simon couldn't help but laugh at the light-hearted suggestions. As they observed the growing intensity and arguments among other students trying to form groups, Dick explained that this was a common phenomenon during the student protection period. Students were racing to secure their positions and avoid being left without a group. Simon couldn't help but feel that the situation was cruel as he watched a student snatch a member from another group. However, both Dick and Malin emphasized that there was no time to worry about others, and competition was a part of the process. Malin pointed out that the struggling students' difficulties were due to their lack of effort, preparation, and skills, and they should have been more proactive in forming their groups. After the 30-minute group formation period came to an end, Professor Jane addressed the students who had not yet formed groups to come forward. The students say we won't see them at Kizen next week. Jane reassured them that a rough beginning didn't guarantee a bad ending. She encouraged them to remember their frustration and use it as motivation to try harder. Jane advised them to distribute the workload of other subjects among themselves to raise their overall scores. The students acknowledged her words and returned to their seats. Following this, Professor Jane made an important announcement regarding the upcoming group performance assessment. She revealed that in the first class of elementary black magic, which would take place when the student protection period was over, students would face a significant challenge. Their task was to battle a formidable monster, a Cyclops. After Professor Jane's announcement about the upcoming group performance assessment involving a Cyclops, the classroom was filled with murmurs and worried questions from the students. The students questioned whether they were capable of fighting a Cyclops with their current skills. In response, Professor Jane began to explain the rules. She clarified that teams would venture into Kizen's underground dungeon together to defeat a Cyclops. Only one member would engage in direct combat with the Cyclops, while the other 3 members would provide support from set positions. Hindrance skills, such as exhaust, binding, and blinding, were permitted, as well as various tactics, including bleeding and poisoning. However, direct attacking magic by necromancers was forbidden, including black magic. To enhance their chances of success, each team had to boost their capabilities to the maximum before the main test. Students would wear a protection vest with a barrier spell, and the grading would consider factors such as hunting speed, stability, teamwork, creativity, and the degree of completion of their magic skills. Jamie raised her hand to ask a question, inquiring whether the assessment would use Kizen's simulated system for virtual battles. Professor Jane clarified that they would be facing actual living Cyclops. She also reminded the students that they needed to sign a life waiver form. As the atmosphere in the classroom changed, another student, Scott, asked about the consequences of failing to defeat the Cyclops. Professor Jane explained that there were 3 potential scenarios leading to failure: when the fighting member couldn't continue, when the professor or safety guard deemed the battle unsafe, or when one of the group members declared they were giving up on the test. Failing to defeat the Cyclops would result in the lowest marks, regardless of other evaluation standards. The group discussed the upcoming Cyclops battle, and Malin asserted that she should be the fighter due to her strength. Simon expressed excitement, while Cammy admitted feeling a bit scared. Dick questioned who should be their fighter, and Malin insisted that she was the strongest. However, Simon raised concerns about the test favoring those skilled in magical combat. Cammy added that dodging might be the best strategy since it was difficult to defend against the Cyclops' heavy blows with black magic. Malin disagreed, pointing out that magical combat students might prefer physical attacks, but the Cyclops had thick skin that would resist such attacks. Dick and Cammy agreed that a physical approach would likely fall short in stamina. Malin then hinted that she had a winning strategy in mind, leaving her teammates curious. Professor Jane addressed the class, explaining that the remaining 3 elementary black magic classes would prepare them for the performance assessment. In the first class, each group would present their hunting strategy, followed by a hands-on experience in a virtual battle in the second class. The actual battle against the Cyclops would take place during the third class the following week. After the class, Dick approached Malin, eager to learn about her strategy. Malin created a magic circle, demonstrating the use of darkness elemental magic called the Dark Flare. This left Dick and Simon impressed, prompting them to praise her skills. Malin then began explaining her plan to her teammates. In the discussion of their strategy against the Cyclops, Malin proposed her plan. She would fight the Cyclops and use Dark Flare to burn it while the rest of the team supported her with curses, primarily stacking exhaust curses to slow down the Cyclops. However, Dick pointed out that this plan didn't involve teamwork, and if Malin did all the work, they wouldn't receive any points for teamwork. Simon expressed concern about Malin's ability to dodge the Cyclops' attacks. Malin insisted that if their curses worked well, she wouldn't need to dodge. Dick argued that neither he nor Cammy specialized in curses, so it wasn't a feasible strategy. Cammy tried to stop Dick and Malin in their argument. Simon slammed the desk and suggested an alternative approach where he would draw the Cyclops' attention using summoned creatures. He asked Dick and Cammy about their specialties. Cammy says that it's better for her to support them with curses while Dick says he just practices exhaust curses the whole week. Simon decided that Cammy and Dick would support them with their respective specialties in hematology and exhaust. After some discussion, Professor Jane proposed that they prepare a 10-minute presentation for the next class, detailing their strategy against the Cyclops, specifying the roles of each team member and the black magics to be used. Professor Jane concluded the class by instructing the students to prepare their presentation materials for the upcoming class. Dick pondered about Simon, acknowledging his cleverness in mediating conflicts, naturally leading the team, and ensuring his fair share of points. He couldn't deny feeling a twinge of jealousy, possibly due to these qualities being among the reasons he was a special admission student. During a cafeteria visit, Dick excitedly contacted Simon, informing him of the day's cafeteria special, the hamburger steak. Simon, eager to partake, replied enthusiastically, and they hurried to enjoy the meal. Malin and Cammy, upon learning about the special, also expressed surprise and desire to join in. However, after the lunch break, Malin voiced her frustration, upset about being left out and missing the opportunity to have the hamburger steak, leading to her throwing a small tantrum and describing the situation as annoying. The professor entered the classroom and instructed the students to take their seats. After inquiring about the class designation, Jamie, a student, raised her hand and informed the professor that it was Class A. The professor acknowledged this and introduced himself as Lang Strauss, the one responsible for teaching their toxicology class. He began the lesson by urging everyone to open their textbooks to page 1. However, it quickly became apparent that the students were finding the lecture uninteresting, as they started to feel bored. To add some excitement to the class, the professor suddenly announced that they would be making low-grade poisoning potions. Despite this attempt to engage the students, they appeared rather lethargic, showing little enthusiasm for the upcoming lab session. While making the announcement, the professor coughed up blood, alarming the class. The teaching assistant promptly intervened, offering to take over the lab session and advising the professor to rest. Once Professor Lang left the classroom, the teaching assistant assumed control. She noticed one student who had fallen asleep and was drooling on their desk. Annoyed by this display of disrespect, she flung a book at the slumbering student, startling not only them but also Simon. The teaching assistant sternly scolded the class, demanding that they wake up and questioning class how they could act so rudely toward the professor. The teaching assistant, Francesca Belmond, sternly admonished the student who had fallen asleep, asking them how they could sleep at their desk during class and reminding them of basic manners. The students replied with a collective, yes, and, understood. Francesca introduced herself as Professor Lang's Ta and took charge of the class for the day. She informed the students that they would be practicing the creation of a low-grade poisoning potion, and they could put away their textbooks. She emphasized that the key to making such a potion was not precise measurements but rather the flexibility and skill with which the potion maker handled the process. The first step was to light the lamp under the cauldron, and once the water started boiling, they were to add the salamander and barley powders from the ingredient pack. One student asked for clarification on the amount to add, to which Francesca responded that it didn't matter and they should use their judgment. Simon poured the powder into his cauldron, remarking on the awful smell. When Dick examined his cauldron, he noted that his potion turned blue while Simon's turned green. Francesca instructed them that if their cauldron emitted blue smoke, they should raise their hand. Dick promptly raised his hand, and Francesca explained that they were tasked with creating a poisoning potion that had a neural paralysis effect. She then addressed the students whose potions had turned green, informing them that they would be making poisoning potions causing acute headaches and hallucinations, which could give them an advantage in dealings with other magicians and necromancers. The students were taken aback by the unorthodox and flexible methods introduced by the Ta, noting that there was no mention of this approach in the textbook, and they hadn't learned about it in their preparatory studies. Francesca instructed those students with green smoke to remove their jackets and place them on their chairs. The teaching assistants would provide them with additional ingredients. Meanwhile, for all students, there was a common step. They were to find a thin layer of oil in their cauldrons and remove it with ladles. This was necessary because vegetable fatty acids could decrease the effectiveness of the poison, and removing them was crucial. After removing the oil, they had to keep stirring the solution until it became sticky. Francesca warned that the solution might congeal if the fire was too strong, so they needed to keep a close eye on it. One student raised their hand and asked about their potion turning yellow. Francesca praised this outcome, explaining that a yellow shade indicated the highest quality among poisoning potions, suitable for sale in Roche. The students were amazed and found it fascinating. Another student raised their hand, reporting a change from blue smoke to green in their potion. Francesca explained that this might have occurred because the ingredients at the bottom of the cauldron floated up and altered the potion's effect. She instructed them to provide additional ingredients to this student as well. Dick whispered to Simon about how he now understood how Professor Lang had survived at Kizen, attributing it to the Ta's remarkable talent. Simon agreed, and the TA noticed their conversation but didn't press further. Dick and Simon discussed the possibility of using the newly discovered potion in their upcoming battle against the Cyclops, wanting to explore all options to increase their chances of success. However, Malin was quick to point out that the potion was considered low-grade and would be ineffective against mid-size or larger monsters like the Cyclops. Disappointed, Dick yawned, echoing the sentiment of the group. Simon, while studying his textbook, stumbled upon the information that the potion required Lahark mushrooms as an ingredient. These mushrooms held a personal connection for him as they were something his mother used to cook with. Intrigued, he shared this information with Malin, who examined the details on page 254. Both she and Cammy were delighted by what they found and believed the potion could be beneficial for their battle against the Cyclops. Malin saw a potion and told the group to look at it. She provided information more details about the Nervier potion, explaining how it could temporarily paralyze tendons and contract muscles. It was effective against monsters of small and medium size with a level of 3 or above, which could prove useful in slowing down the Cyclops during their battle. The group discussed various ways to use the potion, such as making the Cyclops drink it or applying it to a wound on the monster and even throwing a bottle containing the potion at it. Cammy suggested trying to make the potion and reserving the magic cauldron lab. However, the challenge lay in obtaining some of the ingredients, particularly the Lahark mushrooms, blood slime, and silk vines, which might be hard to find. Dick offered to go to Rockist after class to procure the necessary ingredients. This surprised Simon, who revealed that he had seen Lahark mushrooms in the Forbidden Forest, both in his hometown and in Kizen. Dick asks these are in Kizen. Where? Simon replies in the Forbidden Forest. Dick, Cammy, and Malin were taken aback by Simon's revelation that Lahark mushrooms were found in Kizen's Forbidden Forest. Dick expressed his concern about Simon's plan to gather Lahark mushrooms from the Forbidden Forest. He was curious how Simon knew about the location of the mushrooms and worried about the potential risks involved. Simon mentioned the possible penalties for making a trip to Rockist. That's why he was eager to do this for the group. Simon reassured the group that the task wouldn't take long and explained that the mushrooms were near the entrance of the forest. He acknowledged the potential dangers of the forest but was willing to take the risk for the sake of the group and assured them he would complete the task quickly. Malin expressed concern about the possibility of monsters attacking and Simon getting injured just before the group evaluation. As it was dangerous, Cammy offered to accompany Simon, believing that going as a pair would be safer. Simon agreed, with the condition that they would leave immediately if the situation became dangerous. The group then decided to divide tasks. Dick would collect blood slime and silk vines, Malin would gather basic ingredients and reserve the lab, while Simon and Cammy would collect Lahark mushrooms. They agreed to reconvene in the lab in the evening with the ingredients they collected. Suddenly a person with the hood looking at them with an evil smile. After the class, a mysterious hooded person approached Hector, offering useful information. Hector turned to listen to the person's proposition, curious about what they had to say. Meanwhile, Simon, holding a lamp, and Cammy, holding a basket, were ready to collect Lahark mushrooms. They were determined to gather the ingredients as quickly as possible and return to their group. Simon urged Cammy to be fast, and she agreed to do her best to help. Dick helped Simon and Cammy by showing them a secret passage. He told them they could leave through that passage since the guards near the Forbidden Forest had just finished their patrol, and it would be a while before they returned. After thanking Dick, Simon and Cammy ventured into the Forbidden Forest. The moon shone beautifully that night, and Simon commented on Cammy's excitement. Cammy expressed her love for taking walks at night. Simon realized that Cammy was a vampire and that she might have a fondness for the night. They entered the Forbidden Forest, and Simon asked Cammy if she liked the nighttime. Cammy confirmed her love for the nighttime, describing it as soft and comfortable. Simon couldn't help but wonder about her words. Cammy then thanked Simon for helping her during the magical combat class when she was struggling to climb. She shared that she had felt ignored by others, except for him, who had offered a helping hand. Simon downplayed his actions, saying he did what he had to do. Cammy replied, doing what you have to do is what makes you incredible. Cammy expressed admiration for his kindness, but Simon seemed uncomfortable with the praise and changed the topic by pointing out Lahark mushrooms. They decided to collect the mushrooms, placing them in Simon's subspace. Cammy then asked Simon about his reasons for coming to Kizen. He explained that initially, his parents had sent him there, but over time, he developed his own goals and aspirations, particularly after learning about summonology, which made him want to become a necromancer. Just as Simon was about to ask Cammy a similar question, they heard something, prompting Simon to pull Cammy and instruct her to hide. Simon and Cammy hid behind rocks as the Kizen guards with masks and hats arrived. Cammy identified them as Kizen guards, responsible for patrolling the areas around Kizen and managing the forest and monster hunting. Simon realized that this must be an emergency search rather than a regular patrol, meaning there was a problem in the Forbidden Forest. Cammy started to cry, worried about getting caught during the student protection period. Simon comforted Cammy, assuring her that he had a plan and asking her to trust him. He instructed her to look at his back and run when he gave the signal. Cammy agreed. Simon contacted Fear and informed him that they were in trouble and that the battalion needed to get into action. Cammy found a stone and placed it in Simon's subspace, while Simon summoned 2 rat skeletons. Simon and Cammy used everything at their disposal to divert the guards' attention. Simon sent one skeleton to lead the guards in one direction and another skeleton in a different direction. The guards followed the skeletons, giving Simon and Cammy a chance to escape. Simon urged Cammy to run faster, but the guard dogs noticed them and began to chase. Simon told Cammy to use her hematology spell. Anything would be fine, and Cammy used her hematology spells to cast poison on the dogs, causing them to cry and bark. The Kizen guards took notice and ordered their colleagues to capture Simon and Cammy. Simon and Cammy ran into the forest. One guard shot arrows at them. Cammy asked Simon what they should do. It is a real arrow, but Simon reassured Cammy that the guards wouldn't harm them, as they recognized their uniforms. The guards continued their pursuit, urging Simon and Cammy to stop. Simon used magic and the stones to delay the guards, who were cautious about the possible magical attacks. The guards eventually lost sight of them and called out to continue searching, determined to find them. Simon and Cammy found themselves at a dead end with a high valley in front of them. Simon suggested using the leaping technique they had learned in magical combat to cross the valley, but Cammy was too scared and shaking to attempt it. She urged Simon to go first and leave her behind if necessary, promising never to reveal his whereabouts even if she got caught. Simon refused to leave Cammy behind and decided to carry her. He conjured darkness around his feet and leapt across the valley with Cammy in his arms. He landed safely on the other side and gently put Cammy down. Cammy, overwhelmed with relief, began to cry. Simon asked if she was hurt, and she replied that she had feared getting caught. Simon was touched by her trust in him, considering sacrificing herself even in her fear. Cammy expressed her gratitude, and Simon assured her that he had acted as a friend should. They realized they had lost the guards and decided to return to school via a longer route. Simon asked if Cammy could walk, and she confirmed that she was okay. Cammy smiled and thanked Simon sincerely for saving her. Simon and Cammy were walking through the forest, trying to find their way back home. Cammy suddenly heard a sound and informed Simon, who initially thought it might be owls. However, Cammy insisted that it was a human voice. They followed the sound and peered from behind a bush to see a person praying. Cammy's head began to hurt, which indicated the presence of a priest, a known weakness of necromancers. Simon wondered how a priest had made it to Kizen on Roke Island, and he was perplexed by the sight of a cross and the priest performing rituals with animal heads and dead goats as offerings at the altar. When the priest noticed them, Simon yelled at Cammy to run. However, before they could escape, a blast of wind passed through, creating smoke and dust that surrounded them. It became evident that the cross was emitting darkness, a necromancer's power, and Simon realized that this wasn't just any priest but a traitor of Kizen who had snuck onto Roke Island. Simon and Cammy found themselves under attack from the traitor priest, who was using a combination of darkness and holiness that should have been incompatible. It became clear that this priest was a traitor to Kizen. Simon quickly realized that they needed to escape, and he grabbed Cammy's hand, urging her to run. However, the traitor was not about to let them get away so easily. The traitor conjured a spell in the form of chains and crosses, firing them. Cammy was struck in the legs, and more magical crosses were flying toward them. Simon, in his attempt to protect Cammy, was hit in the shoulder by one of the magical chains. Cammy's legs were caught in the magical chains, and she was being pulled towards the traitor and Cammy's cries for help. The traitor pulled Cammy using the chain and she was screaming in the air. Simon watched in horror as she was slammed into a tree by the chains. The traitor continued to conjure chains to attack Simon. The chains consecutively fired chasing Simon, but he avoided it by running. While he was running, more magical chain and crosses was approaching him. He had to think quickly. He reached into his subspace and pulled out a sword, but it broke when he tried to use it. Chains were closing in on him from both sides. Simon knelt to avoid them, then picked up a stone, filling it with darkness, and hurled it at the traitor. However, the traitor managed to evade the attack. Simon stood his ground, facing the traitor, as the chains moved like tentacles, and the traitor unleashed even more power, conjuring hundreds of magical crosses that hovered in the air. Simon and Cammy were in grave danger. Simon, realizing that the traitor priest was far too powerful for him to handle, he held up his badge and he summoned Fear for assistance. Fear appeared and swiftly struck the traitor with his powerful sword, sending the traitor flying. Fear chuckled menacingly and assured Simon that he should stand back, as this opponent was beyond Simon's current abilities. The traitor reacted by conjuring a magic shield to protect himself from Fear's sudden attack. A fierce battle between the two beings ensued, with Fear unleashing his might against the formidable traitor. The clash between them was intense, creating explosions and chaos in their vicinity. Meanwhile, Simon rushed to Cammy, who was unconscious. He checked on her and was relieved to find that she wasn't seriously injured. He lifted her onto his back and decided to make a hasty retreat, asking Fear for updates on the situation. Fear explained that the traitor was incredibly powerful, possibly at a professor's level, particularly in the darkness element. Fear mentioned that if it weren't for his seal, he'd be evenly matched. Simon says that he has a plan and Fear must follow his orders. Fear agreed to follow his orders, and replied that he was Richard's son, so he must have some clever ideas. As the intense battle raged on, a massive explosion rocked the battlefield, a clear sign that Fear and the traitor were locked in a fierce confrontation. Simon knew they needed to make their escape quickly while he is carrying Cammy on his back.
Did you find this video enjoyable? If it brought value to your day, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more content like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so don't hesitate to leave a comment below with your feedback or suggestions. Thank you for tuning in, and may your day be filled with peace.